If you grew up in the Ellwood City area in the 80s or earlier, you probably remember the rhyme. The dare. The whispered name in the dark bathroom while lightning cracked outside. Say it 3 times. Go to sleep. Wait for the scratching. But before she was a dare, before she was a warning, before she was something whispered in a mirror, she was a real person. The story you're about to hear is not the story you grew up with, because sometimes a new beginning is the start of an ending. I'm Van Holsing, and you're listening to Life, the Universe, and Everything in Between. I didn't go to Tindall Cemetery to summon anything. I went because I was 18 and bored. And the air in Ellwood City felt like it was made of lead. My grandfather used to say that Mary Black wasn't a ghost, but she was a stain. I found her stone. It was cracked, leaning into the mud like it was trying to crawl back down. I didn't say her name 3 times. I didn't do the ritual. I just touched the cold mossy granite and whispered, "Are you actually there?" The woods went dead. No crickets. No wind. Just the sound of my own heart, which suddenly felt way too loud. I drove home, turned the lights off, and went to bed. That was 6 months ago. It started with the ticking. Every night at 3:14, I'd hear a sound like the fingernail tapping on a window. Tink, tink, tink. I live on the 2nd floor. I ignored it. Then the smell started. Not rot, but the heavy, cloying scent of wet wool and marsh gas. It would pool in the corners of my room, thick enough to make my eyes water. 2 weeks ago, I woke up and couldn't move. Doctor said it was sleep paralysis. But sleep paralysis doesn't leave physical evidence. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I felt a weight settle on my mattress. The springs groaned. Something cold, colder than ice, colder than a Pennsylvania winter, slid under my covers. It felt like a hand with a skin like damp parchment, sliding slowly up my calf. I tried to scream, but my throat was full of dry soil. I could hear her breathing, a wet, rattling sound like someone was trying to inhale through a throat full of swamp water. When I finally broke the paralysis and bolted upright, the room was empty. But when I pulled back the sheets, there were 3 long black hairs coiled on my pillow. They weren't human. They were thick, like horsehair, and they smelled like the bottom of a grave. I stopped looking in mirrors. I covered them all with sheets. But last night, I made a mistake. I was brushing my teeth, and the corner of the towel over the medicine cabinet slipped. I saw my own bathroom, but it was filled with water, dark, murky swamp water. And standing right behind my reflection was a woman in a heavy black Victorian dress. Her skin was bloated, white as a fish's belly, and her eyes were gone. Just empty, dark holes, leaking silt. She was sewing. With a needle made of bone, she was slowly stitching a piece of my own hair into the hem of her dress. Every time the needle pierced the fabric, I felt a sharp stabbing pain in the back of my neck. She looked up in the glass. She didn't have a mouth, just a jagged tear in her gray skin. She leaned in close to the glass side of the mirror and fogged it with her breath. As I watched, she wrote one word in the condensation. Soon. I haven't slept since. I can feel the stitches now, deep under my skin, pulling me towards the woods. I can hear the Beaver River calling my name. And the worst part? When I look at my hands, the skin is starting to turn a pale, bruised gray. The soon didn't arrive with a scream or a cinematic jump scare. It arrived as a slow, agonizing realization that my body was no longer entirely mine. 3 days after the mirror fogged over, I stopped feeling the cold. I went for a walk along the outskirts of Chewton in a t-shirt while the frost was thick on the ground, and I felt nothing. My skin didn't even goosebump. It just felt tight, like a suit that was too small. I went to the local diner to see if being around people would help. I sat at my usual booth, but the waitress walked right past me. 3 times. I raised my hand. I cleared my throat. I even dropped my fork on the floor to make a sound. She didn't flinch. She looked right through me like I was made of clean glass. I walked over to the counter and stood inches from her face. She was humming a song, looking at the clock. I reached out to touch her arm, and my hand didn't feel like skin. It felt like wet, heavy clay. She shivered, rubbed her arm, and muttered, "Someone must have left the freezer door open." I wasn't a person to her. I was a draft. I was the cold spot. I ran back home, if you can call it running. My joints felt stiff, as if they were filled with silt and river stones. I tore the sheets off my mirrors in my hallway, screaming for her to take it back. The reflection wasn't me anymore. It was Mary Black. But she wasn't the bloated, swamp-drowned thing anymore. She was looking healthy. Her skin was warm. She was wearing my favorite hoodie. She was standing in my hallway, holding my phone, looking at photos of my family with a curious, predatory smile. Behind her, on my side of the glass, the hallway was filling with water. The floorboards under my feet turned to muck. I looked down and saw my legs were dissolving into black, oily water. The stitches I'd felt in my neck finally snapped. The pain was so sharp, it felt like my soul was being unzipped. She leaned into the glass from the other side. She didn't need to write in the condensation this time. She just spoke, and her voice was my voice. The exact pitch and tone I've heard on voice memos and videos. "Thank you for being the light," she whispered. "It's been so dark under the bridge." She stepped forward, and for a second, the glass felt like a soap bubble. Then it hardened. I hit the surface of the mirror from the inside. It was cold. It was solid stone. I watched through the glass as I walked into the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and turned off the lights. She didn't look back. Now I'm the one tapping on the glass at 3:14 a.m. I'm the reason your room smells like wet wool. I'm the reason you find long, black hairs on your pillow. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to find someone else. Someone bored. Someone curious. Someone who will touch the glass and ask if I'm there. I'm just waiting for my next soon. The mirror only shows you what you bring into it. Fear. Expectation. A name you were told not to say. But glass is just glass, and if you stare long enough at it, eventually you'll realize something unsettling. The story isn't in the reflection. It's behind it. So instead of waiting for a shape to form in the dark, instead of listening for scratching at the door, let's do something far more dangerous. Let's break through the mirror. Let's step past the dare, past the lightning, past the version told in whispers, and let's walk into the life of Mary Black. Mary Johnson was born in 1801 in Ireland. She later married Andrew Black and immigrated to western Pennsylvania around 1832. They settled in the Shenango and Taylor Township area of what would later become Lawrence County. She had 9 children. She lived into her late 80s and died in 1888. She was buried in Tindall Cemetery in Chewton, a small wooden burial ground just off Turkey Hill Road. Today it sits overgrown, white, and mostly forgotten beneath a thick brush and trees. Her will is still on record. She left $1 to each of her children. She left her copper kettle to her daughter Margaret Douglas, and left her house and land to her grandson Charles Reinhardt. That's what the documents say. What many people don't realize is that much of the Mary Black legend, as it's remembered today, didn't fully take form until the mid-20th century. Near Tindall Cemetery lived a man locally as Harry the Hermit, Harry Stein. He was a real person, nearly blind, deeply religious, and known for walking everywhere and teaching Sunday school in the area for decades. In the 1960s and 1970s, local kids would seek Harry out. They brought him cookies, cakes, or snacks, and in return he would tell them stories. Some were moral tales, some were meant to scare, and others were simply imaginative yarns meant to hold attention. According to local historians, Harry often drew inspiration from nearby places and names, including gravestones in Tindall Cemetery. One of those names was Mary Black. Over time, the stories Harry told were retold, reshaped, and exaggerated as they passed from kid to kid. What may have started as a spooky campfire-style story gradually hardened into something people believed was much older and much darker than it really was. Importantly, there's no evidence that Harry believed Mary Black was a witch, or that he intended to create a lasting legend. He was a storyteller, not an accuser. But once the stories escaped his voice and entered the wider community, they took on a life of their own. By the 1980s, Tindall Cemetery had become something else entirely. What was once a quiet resting place turned into a destination. Teenagers drove out at night. Flashlights cut through the brush. Beer cans piled up along the tree line. It wasn't reverence that brought them there. It was curiosity, dares, thrill-seeking, and eventually, destruction. Headstones were knocked over. Some disappeared altogether. Graves sank where the earth had been disturbed. There were reports that Mary Black's grave had been dug up. Her body had been removed from the ground. Stories spread that her bones had been found in different places, that they had been used in rituals, that satanic practices had been taking place among broken stones. Understanding Harry's role reframes the entire story. Mary Black wasn't feared in her lifetime. She wasn't accused in court. She wasn't documented as dangerous. Her legend appears to be the result of storytelling layered over time. A real name, a quiet cemetery, a gifted storyteller in generations of retelling. That's how folklore is born. And once a legend grows large enough, it stops belonging to the person it started with. Mary Black's story is one of memory, rumor, vandalism, storytelling, and a way fear can attach itself to a name long after the truth has been buried. So the next time someone tells you to say your name 3 times in the dark bathroom, ask yourself something first. Are you summoning a witch? Or are you keeping a story alive? I hope you've enjoyed this Lore and Legends episode from life, the universe, and everything in between. If you like this episode and want to support the show, the best thing you can do is share it. Every share helps keep the stories alive and keeps me writing more of them. And if you have a story you'd like to share, or you just want to say hi, you can reach me at theinbetweenpod.com. Thanks again for listening.